Here.
Quintero.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Chairman Yusefian.
Here. May we have your report, please?
The agenda for the February 13, 2007 regular meeting of the Glendale Redevelopment Agency was posted on Thursday, February 8, 2007 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Okay, what's next, please?
Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I will abstain from the minutes since I was absent.
Second.
There's a motion, second. Roll call, please.
Council members Manukian,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
Quintero,
Yes.
Weaver,
Aye.
Chairman Yusefian.
Abstain. What's next, please?
Next item is oral communication. Discussion is limited to items not part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 5 minutes. Members of the redevelopment agency may question or respond to a speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. The matter may be referred to staff through the executive director for investigation and report.
Okay, I do not have any oral communication cards. Oral communication will be closed. What else, please?
Item 6A on the business agenda is a public hearing, Director of Development Services regarding parking exception for property located at 240 North Brand Boulevard, Glendale Career College, for 119 spaces. At 6A1 is resolution certifying and adopting a mitigated negative declaration for the project. At 6A2 is motion approving parking exception, subject to comments and conditions.
Okay, and with that, I'll go to Mr. Starbuck.
And we'll go to Alex Hamilton, Senior Project Manager, for the staff report. Alex?
Agency Chair, agency members, I'll give you a brief overview of the parking exception that's in front of you before I turn it over to Mr. Dan Sykes from the college, who in turn will have Mr. Seth Weber come up and walk you through the various points of this parking exception. Last December, the agency had indicated a willingness to consider this parking exception request. This is a revised parking exception request before you. The school has downsized the area of their footprint that they'll be occupying, the proposed 240 North Brand space, from about previously about 30,000 square feet to about 19,000 square feet, of which about 8,300 square feet will be devoted to classroom activities in the basement only. The balance of that will then, they'll have some administrative office functions on the first floor, but the first floor will now have about 7,500 square feet that will be available for retail and other uses at the ground floor level. The school has proposed, in keeping with some conditions and or suggested conditions and restrictions on their use, they've agreed to the various conditions that the agency had suggested last December. They've reduced their student enrollment to 425 students. They've agreed to a 3-year term, and that is an absolute term. They've also, the parking exception request is now for 119 spaces, although their usage will indicate that they need 138 parking spaces. The college has also agreed to post $1 million cash bond to guarantee that they will vacate the space at 240 North Brand, and there is a covenant that is the draft form of the covenant is attached to your report that has been in concept agreed to by Dorn Platts, which will further guarantee that the college will leave the space after 3 years. Basically, the covenant will guarantee that the term of the lease between Dorn Platts and the college is for no more than 3 years. A couple of other items. In keeping with some agency members' concerns about and a desire to keep the use in the city, staff agrees with the agency that this is an important use to the city, has historically been very important, and there is a letter of intent, a draft letter of intent between Dorn Platts and the college that has indicated that Dorn Platts has really pledged to locate the college in their project at San Fernando Duran. We think that's doable. I can let the college give you an update as well as representatives from Dorn Platts on that, but the commitment is there, and that will in turn keep the college in the city of Glendale. And then finally, there is a voluntary condition wherein the college will fund two $12,500 scholarships annually for 3 years, the number of years of the lease term, for a total of $75,000 And that document is also attached to your staff report. All of the attachments to the staff report reflect work that staff has been doing with the college and with the developer, and we think that that work has indicated that the spirit and intent of the conditions that you had expressed, that you said that you wanted to see in December, has been met. The parking exception will require that you review and certify the final environmental document. It's a mitigated negative declaration. The revised environmental document analyzed the revised student enrollments as well as updated occupancies of the Orange Street garage, as well as a motion to approve the parking exception with conditions. And those conditions are indicated in the report, but all of those conditions really are in furtherance of and serve to guarantee that the school will perform at this location, that the parking can be managed in such a way as not to be have a detrimental impact on the area. As you see in the conditions, there is a parking management plan that they'll be required to engage in and enter into with the City of Glendale, working very closely with both this department as well as the Traffic and Transportation Administrator. So in short, staff is recommending that the agency approve the final environmental study and certify the attached mitigated negative declaration with mitigation measures, as well as the parking exception with conditions for 119 spaces. If there are no questions of me, I'll now turn it over to Mr. Dan Sykes.
Any questions? Could you tell us the fiscal impacts? What we will be collecting for those parking spaces? I know it's in the staff report.
It is in the report.
Public, I want to know.
Yes. We do estimate that there will be approximately $75,000 generated annually to the city's parking fund, and as well as a one-time deposit that's a refundable deposit for key cards that will equal 138 parking spaces in the Orange Street garage. Mr. Bagdanian and Mr. Mitchell are here as well to elaborate on how that program will be set up and what it means. But basically, every student, faculty member, and administrative staff person will be required to have a parking pass, and those passes are set up to a total 138 parking spaces. As you know,
Did you say Maryland Street?
Orange.
no, Orange Street Garage, yes. And the way it's set up is it's taken into account the various class schedules of the school. As you all know, they have morning, afternoon, and evening sessions. So we believe that this program, as well as the fiscal impacts and our estimate of the fiscal impacts, are it'll be a manageable program, and it will yield about $75,000 a year annually to the city's parking fund for 3 years.
Mr. Quintero.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment as I read the staff report that the Orange Street garage has 625 spaces, but the survey shows that between 10 and 8 p.m. On Monday through Thursday, it never exceeds more than 200 spaces. In other words, only 200 spaces are taken out of a 625 space structure. And then after 8 p.m., the count, usually from Monday through Thursday, doesn't go above 150. So we still have hundreds of spaces that are unused, and I hope the public takes advantage of it, actually.
Mr.
Mr. Chairman, just one thing to add, back on the fiscal impact, the college has also agreed to fund scholarships, two $12,500 scholarships for the 3 years that they are there. So that is another total of $75,000 as part of your fiscal impact.
One question I had is, they have more than 140 students. This is calculated on the basis of shared parking program.
Yes.
So if each student has one of those cards, would those cards, I know they're computerized, would they be controlled in such fashion so they work only for the time period that they're going to be in college, so this way they will be added there so somebody else can take that place? Is that how it's going to work?
I'll let Mr. Mitchell and Bagdanian speak to that because it is a little bit complicated, but that is my understanding. By requiring that all students, a faculty member, and administrative staff persons have parking passes, I don't think it's that finely tuned, but the idea is that everybody will have a parking pass, and the school will administer this program. We really believe that the way this program is going to be set up and administered and monitored, that the parking, the students there'll be a disincentive for them to park anywhere else, and somewhat self-policing in a sense as well. If the parking is provided, it's provided as part of the college program. We believe everybody will use the Orange Street garage.
Right. I'm trying to understand how this is going to work, and I think maybe Mr. Bagdanian can answer that question for me, is there's going to be more than 140 students. So it's going to be maybe 140 students in the morning from certain time to certain time, then maybe 40 of those go home, and some new 40 people come in. How do you deal with those 140 spaces? Was my understanding correct that the cards basically are designed in such fashion that go with their time on their curriculum, or how
We
do
have
you
the
operate
capability of restricting the usage of the card to a certain hours and times of the day.
that? Okay.
So
So you have
all
the
this-
technology.
Yeah, we have the technology. Our access system allows us to, restrict it. So what we will do as soon as the college begins operation, we will issue the cards. We will monitor the occupancy on a monthly basis. We will look at the usage of the cards and see what time the students are coming, what time they're leaving. We will be sharing that with the college. We will do a management of those cards very extensively, so make sure that, we don't exceed. I mean, fortunately, we have the capacity. So even if we get more students parking there, that's good because they're not going to be parking on Brand or any of the other residential
Right,
streets.
but you're going to give them some grace period. So let's
We
say
have-
if the
we have
class
the-
is over at 10 o'clock, if he shows up to the gate at 10:30, he doesn't have to pay. I mean, there's a
At this
certain
point,
amount of
initial
grace
point,
period.
we're not planning to restrict their time right now. The cards will be, because these students may come to the college and they stay longer, if they stay longer. But the way the class schedule shows and the occupancy survey is being done, at maximum at this point of 140 students will be there at one time. So we will be monitoring that. We will make adjustments to it. So if they go over that, we will ask them to purchase more cards.
Okay. Mr. Starbuck.
I was just going to point out, although we won't have the initial restrictions built in, we'll get a detailed report, so we'll know how much they're being used, how many separate students are using them, so they can be coded in a way that we'll have all
Yes,
that
we have that.
information on the numbers
So-
of students, separate usage, length of usage, days, and amount of time. So if indeed they're using more than we anticipated, we can address the issue with the college.
Yes. So if we have to restrict it that, certain cards work only till noon because that's where the classes are, we have that capability.
Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, I would like to add one more thing. Staff did receive some letters expressing concern, and I wouldn't say necessarily opposition, but some concern and reservations with this proposed parking exception request. I have copies of them for each one of you. One of them is from Verdugo via Homeowners Association. I believe they're in the condos on Maryland and maybe California. The other is from First Realty and Mr. Halpern, who I believe is the owner of the property at the northeast corner of California and Brand, where the Ethan Allen Furniture Store was located. And then finally, we have a petition from some of the Glendale businesses, primarily some of the businesses in the 200 block of North Brand, expressing some concern. Our view of these concerns, they're valid concerns. We've heard these concerns before as we've been going through this. We do believe that the program is set up, if you approve the parking exception, that the protections are in place to address the concerns about the school. Furthermore, we think that the mobility plan discussion and study session you're going to be having a little bit later on this afternoon, and certainly in the long term will address some of these very concerns about impacts on residential parking in the adjacent adjacent neighborhoods, inefficiencies in how our meters are set up and how the parking rate is set up for, public parking and whatnot. But we did wanted to disclose to you some of the concerns that have been expressed.
Mr. Najarian, then Mr. Weaver.
Alex, currently we have some car dealers parking some stock, some surplus vehicles up there. Would the imposition of this agreement cause any of them to be relocated?
No, the option is always there if usage of the garage increases, but we're not anticipated that the dealers will have to be relocated as a result of this request.
Mr. Weaver.
Did you get an email from Harry Hall?
No, I didn't.
Starbird, do you? Any of you? Because I forwarded it on to all of you before we got in here.
No, as of
Concern
when
they
I
had
left for
on-
lunch, I hadn't seen it.
A concern on time limits on Brand. I didn't bring my copy in. Maybe I ought to go get copies for all of us. I guess he's speaking for the downtown merchants.
Oh, that's maybe for the mobility or on the
So he
side
asked me to pass it on to city manager and council.
Was it about this or about the mobility
Yes.
study? About this?
But
Let me walk over.
I think. I'm not positive, but I better go get it, unless you want to go over, Mr. Starbird.
Okay, if there are no other questions of me, I'll turn this over to Mr. Sykes from the college.
Yeah. Thank you. So Sykes, 5 minutes, please. Your name for the record.
Good afternoon. I'm Dan Sykes. I'm president of Landmark Education Services. We're headquartered in Norfolk, Virginia. We own and operate 8 locations, of which one is the Glendale Career Schools here in Glendale. My role today is really just to introduce Seth, but I wanted to stand up and at least say a few words because I need to at least go back a day late on Valentine's Day and reassure my wife my presence here was extremely important, and more than possibly what's coming across for the public record here today. But I was here last month, and we did listen to your comments, recommendations, and conditions that you asked us to go back and take a look at. We have, and I want to thank you particularly for giving us very good access to your staff, because without your staff, you cannot move through all these details. There are a lot of details. There's a lot of moving parts here, from scholarships to $1 million bond, et cetera, and the staff has been wonderful the last 4 weeks working with us to satisfy all those conditions.
Mr. Stephan, I just needed to remind you if we could open the public hearing to have Mr. Sykes' comments be part of that public hearing
Public
process.
hearing is open.
Thank you.
So Seth Weber, Seth has worked with me for a few years, and I asked him to come out here 18 months ago, and he is the campus director. And so I'm going to introduce Seth to comment specifically about the different issues that are on the table.
Comment.
Are you done?
Yes, sir.
Okay, any questions?
Yeah. I don't know who wants to answer it, but my concern before, and I've seen it raised again, how do you assure that the students and faculty will park in there? And what if they don't? Will there be a form of punishment in terms of removal from the school, fine, whatever, if they try to park on the surface streets?
Well, I believe there will be, living in Norfolk, Virginia,
like
but I
to
think Seth
address-
is the appropriate person to
It's
discuss
in the
that.
letters we're getting.
Okay. Thanks. Any other questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
By the way, you're going to have to get her something nice and shiny. I don't think this is going to save you.
Even a little record of this?
I don't think this is going to save you.
Thank you.
For the record, my name is Seth Weber. I'm the campus director over at Glendale Career College, and I want to thank all you for your time. Mr. Weaver, specifically to your concerns, we have a number of different things in place that we think will be incentives. Included in their tuition and fees will be the parking. There will not be additional outlay from the students for parking at the Orange Street Garage. Since the school is paying for those parking spots, we obviously have a strong economic incentive to see those used. Some of the things that were touched on earlier would be this monthly reporting back and forth. We, as you can see in the staff report, will be required to provide enrollment data and staff-level information and some other information back to the city. They will be providing us with detailed reports of when our cards are being used, and we'll be able to match those up and see who's using those.
And if not?
And if not, we don't have a specific series of fines or anything in place. We'd be happy to look at that. Quite frankly, we thought that since this parking would be included at no additional cost for the student. There is a very strong self-policing notion. The other thing that I do want to point out is the metered spots currently have a 3-hour limit. Our classes are in session for 5 hours at a time, so there really is no good incentive to park at a metered spot that's out there behind the facility now as it currently stands. Between that 5-hour limit and some of the other things, I think that would be important. I did want to touch on some of my other points.
If I just get back to that point one more time, Mr. Yusefian. Sure. That doesn't cut it, because people that go to Damon's or go to Porto's refuse to walk a half a block to park in the garage. I can look and I can see it sitting half empty. They'll circle the block and circle the block, anything to park for free on Brand, several streets. I'm just guessing you're on the east side of Brand. They're going to go out and they're going to fill up whatever vacant parking spots are on the street that 24-hour Fitness is not using and stay there. There's got to be some mechanism to either fine them or remove them from the school if they violate what you're paying free for them to go to.
Right. And we don't have that plan totally laid out yet. What I would say is it would probably be a series of fines, because removing them from school, I think, would be a very harsh measure to take. If there were, repetitive issues or a chronic offender, then certainly we'd look at that. But again, as people go to Porto's or some of the other locations as they use 24-hour Fitness, it's a different type of use because it's a much shorter period of time. The Orange Street garage is there. The use will be provided for free. In talking with Traffic and Transportation, some of the other people, we thought that the self-policing notion of this would work out very well. If that doesn't prove adequate, we'll move on to the next phase.
That's what all these are about.
Okay.
The people do it, human nature.
Mr. Quintero.
Well, let me just say that these are adults and young adults who are being trained for jobs, for careers, et cetera. Part of that process is teaching them how to interview, many other things, and so I'm sure you'll be able to let them know that as part of this business that you're running, Glendale Career College means you have to park in the parking structure.
That's right.
So I think you're going to have an excellent compliance rate. I don't see that people are going to want to go feed meters, and they'll have plenty on their plate without having to go in and out of any buildings.
We hope to keep them busy enough that that's the last thing on their mind is feeding meters. If I could run through a few things, my time is about to expire here, unfortunately, but I wanted to point out that there have been some vast changes from the original proposal. We initially came to you with a 10-year term. We're now looking at a 3-year term. We have opened up more retail space on the first floor of 240 North Brand to be used. We also have reduced our parking load from over 300 spots down to 140 spots, primarily by reducing the amount of classroom space and containing all of that classroom space to the basement level. Student capacity has dropped from 622 students to 425, and we've chopped the amount of classroom space almost in half, from about 15,294 square feet down to 8,310 square feet. The conditions that have been imposed that are listed on page 5 of the staffing report, the 140 parking spaces in the Orange Street garage, as we were just discussing, obviously, is something that's very important. We are willing to do whatever we need to do to enforce the parking on that end. The parking exception would be for a 3-year maximum term to coincide with the term of the lease. Glendale Career College is willing to post a $1 million cash bond, and that bond form has been agreed to. Continue. There is a covenant that has been agreed to in form between Doran Platts and the agency. There's a letter of intent to pursue this San Fernando Doran project, and I have copies of the executed letter of intent here. There are 2 different ones with different dates. One has been signed by Doran Platts, one has been signed by the college. And that brings us to the last item, the 2 scholarships per year. We've already talked with Verdugo Job Center. We've put together a memorandum of understanding that has been accepted by both the college and Verdugo Job Center, and we're just waiting on a final form of that back from the city attorney. So we have heard your concerns from before. We're prepared to meet all of those conditions and to move forward on this. As far as
The parking, we already discussed that. We probably need to talk about some sort of a fine system in order to beef up the enforcement end of that, which we would be more than happy to do. And that brings me finally to what are the benefits of to the city. First and foremost, it allows a long-standing educational institution to remain here in the city, an institution that's been focused on putting people in high-demand jobs. It also addresses a shortage of medical staffers, which has been well documented, including over the weekend, this article from the Daily News about stretched too thin. This is precisely the type of shortages that we're trying to address. We have copies for the redevelopment agency here as well. I thank you very much for your time. I thank you for your access to staff. They've been a tremendous help in helping us navigate these waters. And if you have any additional questions, I'd be happy to answer those at this time.
Well, Seth, Dan Sykes again from Norfolk. While Seth's standing here, to Mr. Quintero's comment, we have a number of conditions our adult learners have to do every day. We take mandatory attendance. We have issues on a daily basis where they have to go out to externships and attend hospitals and doctors. And we are not going to put this permit at risk over parking. And it's that simple. And if we have to impose fines or eject them from the school, it's no different from the other conditions these adult learners live under. And they respond extremely well to the conditions we give them. So, thank you.
A question? Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Rodney Kahn?
I'm only here to answer questions.
Any questions from Rodney?
Glad you asked that.
Thank you. Sheldon Baker? Boy, this is going real well.
Boy.
All right. All right, now let's go to all the people who wanted to speak. Edward Halper. Your name for the record, please.
My name's Edward Halpern. I am one of the owners of the adjacent property across California. And by the way, I would like to compliment Mr. Hamilton. He's been most courteous and most helpful, and I appreciate his efforts in this matter. As you know, parking is the major issue there. It's been the major issue. We're vacant at the moment, and it's been the major issue with every tenant that we've talked to, and been the reason that negotiations have fallen apart with every tenant that we've dealt with. On the other hand, as a property owner, we understand the needs of the college and the needs of the property owner of this property to fill their property. So I have some sympathy for their position. My main emphasis is along the lines of what you were saying, Mayor Weaver, and that's ensuring compliance here. I believe that the board has done a good job in looking at the problems that can arise, but I am not convinced that leaving the job of compliance to the college is a satisfactory answer. They can agree to fine their students or agree to handle their students, but the truth is that the college is not in the business of parking. They're not in the parking business. It's not likely to be their major concern. And it is, my experience tells me that it's much harder to enforce a condition than it is to impose it. And if they fail to meet their obligations under the conditions, it can be a long and arduous process to bring about compliance. Therefore, I would like to see a condition imposed that affects the college itself, either by ways of fines or financial guarantees or other incentives for the college itself to meet their obligations to make sure that their students are not filling the limited parking spaces that are available now. I also do have a question, and maybe some of you know, and that's about the overlap, which was also raised. If you've got 140 students or 145 students and 40 of them are leaving at 11:10, but 40 are coming at 10 to 11, what happens there? I'd like to know that their passes are covered in that sake, and there will be parking available for those people when you do have the overlap. the final issue, Mr. Quintero, I understand your thoughts about the school, but I find it a bit optimistic, to tell you the truth. I agree it's a possibility, but I do believe that in rain or in difficult circumstances or when students are in a hurry, they will park in the most convenient place, which is likely to be the metered lot across the street, and then run over during breaks to put in some coins. So we feel that imposed conditions upon the college itself are necessary in this case.
Mr. Weaver.
I think I understood in the past that there is a check and balance in that city will also get the run of people parking there, and we will be able to see ourselves how many are not parking there. So we can, maybe Mr. McDaniel can answer to Mr. Starbird.
If I can respond to Mr. Bagdanian, as I understand our reporting, we'll know how many cards are issued. They'll all record the parking habits of those who have cards, and then as a result, we'll know the people who aren't using their cards as well. So and frankly, we have our parking enforcement officers out in that area all the time. We'll have a very quick sense if students aren't parking in the garage and instead are loading up the streets. It'll become very apparent very quickly. One, will have a record. Frankly, we won't see kids using the garage. And two, our parking enforcement officers will see very quickly, because it's already a compacted area. They'll see very quickly if it's becoming more compacted, accompanied with passes not being used, in which case we'll need to sit down and figure out how we address that.
Are you on the northeast corner?
We're on
California?
the northeast corner, that's correct.
Okay, the one that's
The one that was the Ethan Allen store.
Right.
I do appreciate that, and I was glad to hear about that system being in place, but it still doesn't answer my concern that what if that system shows they're not meeting their condition? How long is it going to take the city to be able to enforce the condition and force the college to do something about it? That's my concern.
I think we'll address that very quickly.
Thank you.
Speaking for myself.
Appreciate it.
Marsha West. Your name for the record, please.
My name is Marcia First, and I'm the CEO of Northwest Colleges, of which one of our locations is here on Brand. And we have been in Glendale for about 30 years, and you were gracious when we moved to Brand to allow us a parking exception also. And that parking exception is for 100 students, and we have abided by it and been very grateful for it. My concern is that even now, without additional people using the garage, it's frequently, even though it might not be all day, every day, that the garage is pretty impacted. And I'm also concerned because we are frequent visitors and patrons of the Alex Theater, and I know there are many times when our night students are there and the garage is just one sea of cars. We monitor our students well, and actually some of our students don't use their parking passes because they carpool. So we hurrah to them about that. So we're concerned about many of those things. Although we like Glendale Career College, we think they're a fine institution, and actually I was friends with their founder many years ago when she founded her school as we founded Northwest College. So I thank you, and I hope you will take into consideration the health of the businesses around Brand, like the bookstores, and of course like Porto's, which is all dear to our heart. Thank you.
Thank you.
Starbird, does the college have classes at night?
I don't know. Let's ask the college folks. Night classes?
No. To my knowledge, no.
Any night classes?
Yes.
You do have night?
Sorry.
We do have night classes, and I don't have a copy of the parking study with me at hand, but that was modeled in the parking study that we did, and it also in that same parking study, I wanted to address the notion of overlap. We actually modeled that in the peak usage study that we did for traffic and transportation, we allowed for students to arrive 15 minutes before class and to be around for half an hour after class, so that would address any notion of overlap. In our existing enrollment scenario, our evening classes, if you'll bear with me a moment here.
Why don't I have you take a seat and
Can I
gather your
address that in a
thoughts,
second?
and I will call you back up.
Thank you.
Let me hear from the other speakers. John King Tarpinian. Your name for the record, please.
John King Tarpinian.
Thank you.
Now, I live in the 300 block of North Louise, basically Louise in California, 1 block from the college. I work at 225 West Broadway, which is across the street from Nordstrom's, the Brown office building. And I walk to and from work every day, so I see how traffic has impacted over the years. And the numbers don't add up to me. Now, I may be missing something, but we're going to have the students purchase, or the school purchase for the students, 140 parking passes, key cards. Yet there are 400 plus students. How are they going to share those parking cards? And secondarily, if I read the information in the binder, it shows that there's 85 faculty and staff. Have they been addressed in that 140 parking spaces being purchased? I also see that they're being allocated 118 parking spaces that were prior use by Cost Plus. And I don't know where those parking spots are anywhere within the community. Are they talking about the metered spots again? So I don't quite see how the parking numbers add up to be able to have, at full capacity, enough parking that's being allocated at this point in time with this exception. I just don't see how the numbers add up. How the students can use only 140 key cards over staggered over 3. Are they going to turn them in when they leave? It just doesn't add up to me as to how they're going to allocate these parking cards to the students. Let's see, what else? The other things had already been addressed, so that was the main concern I had. Is that I live on Louise. I've lived there since the 80s. As time has gone by, parking has been not a problem at all, to, oh goodness, I found a spot, lucky me. And the city does have the parking enforcement. Rarely do I see them coming up and down my block as it is now. And with the students predisposed to find another spot, maybe not in the orange garage, I'm sorry, the Maryland garage, orange garage, sorry, I don't see parking enforcement being able to keep up with the extra demand. And as a suggestion for regulation, maybe the school could collect the license plate numbers of the vehicles the students are using. They could pass that to parking enforcement, so as they're going through the metered lot behind the school or across the street, parking enforcement would know if there is a student that's using the metered lot, as a thought. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nancy Kent.
My name is Nancy Kent. I'm a resident of Glendale. I'm not in the immediate neighborhood around this use, so I will defer to the people who do live there or have businesses there for their opinion on whether this use should go in. But I would suggest on the agreement to have it there for 3 years. I didn't quite understand if that's an absolute 3 years, but I would suggest that it be made so that it's 3 years that would terminate unless both parties would like to extend it for whatever time you would like to extend it. I've heard comments when this was up before the council before the redevelopment agency before, that when the Americana comes in, the business will be flourishing. But it might be that business is flourishing south of Brand, but perhaps this use north of Brand, south of Broadway, and perhaps this use north of Broadway in 3 years, both parties might want to keep it there. So I'm wondering if it could be written with flexibility on that. Another point is, I don't know if there's the hardware for locking up a bicycle in the Orange Street garage, but if that's not there, may I suggest that the city include lots of bike racks to encourage the students who would care to ride bikes to use that kind of transportation. Thank you.
Thank you. Barry Allen? Your name for the record, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, staff, the authority. I'm Barry Allen for Vanguard. I won't even go near the parking. I've had so many friends who belong to 24-Hour Fitness that can't find parking now, and they said, gee, what will happen in the future? I think that there are some issues, one of which I think this council was going to look at with regard to Ivan Insua and the fact that he built without a building permit and that he ultimately resigned. Now, it's my understanding that Doran Platts started this particular project without getting all of the building permits necessary other than for the outside facade. And yet here we are, the ever-ready bunny, this just keeps going and going and going, and now we're here again regarding a parking situation. And we all know that parking is certainly a major concern anywhere in Glendale. But we also show that, unfortunately, each department works within its own vacuum. Now, we have a Beeline service that closes down at 7 o'clock in the evening, and from what I've heard from the statements, classes go till 10. My gosh, if we were able to provide ongoing and continuing bus service, maybe we could use outlying parking facilities. And if we didn't have those outlying parking facilities, certainly we could look at building them. So I know it's election season, it's silly season, and we're going to be looking at campaign contributions for those who are here today and looking at two of our council members who will be running. But I think we need to look at the different standards we're holding our boards and commissions and applicants for parking variations who have as well not gotten building permits, and I think that should be an issue today. And I know that one of the things that Mr. Yusefian had brought up before, and with regard to the Doran Platts building, and which I thought was a great idea, it was a beautiful plan, and holding out and saying, give us the money because we've seen what's happened in the past. Let's keep in mind what has happened in the past. Thank you. I'm Barry Allen for Vanguard.
Thank you. That was the last card I had, and I'll go back to our city attorney. Could you tell us once again? I'm sorry,
Mr.
You-
Yusefian.
I forgot.
It took me a moment to get some of my
All right,
figures
go
together
ahead.
here. First of all,
Your name for record again.
I'm sorry, my name is Seth Weber. I'm the campus director at Glendale Career College. In the staff report, under some different tables, we put together, Table A was our existing enrollment scenario, Table B was our maximum enrollment scenario of 425 students, and then Table C actually breaks both of those enrollment scenarios down in 15-minute increments from 7:45 a.m. till 11 p.m. That enrollment, both of those enrollment scenarios look at the total number of students, staff, and faculty, and at no time do we ever exceed needing 138 spaces.
Do they all get there at the same time?
They do not, because it's
425 plus 89, 90 staff, they all get there?
You mean overlap?
actually, over the course of the day, for the 425 student scenario, we'd have 140 day students, we'd have 36 afternoon students, we'd have 102 evening students, and 147 of those students would be off on externs, so they're not actually using the facility at all during those times. So that is how that 425 breaks down in needing only 138 spots at any one time. As far as the faculty and staff, those folks are spread out over the day. We've got morning instructors, afternoon and evening instructors, and then our staff tend to have business hours that are more like 8 to 6, 8 to 7, that type of thing. I did want to point out one other thing in terms of the impact of the Orange Street Garage. Figure B in the staff report includes material that's from the Traffic and Transportation Division that looks at the Orange Street parking structure occupancy, and the average is around 300 spaces on any given day, and so that even included modeling in the Glendale Career College spots that were needed. So there do seem to be plenty of spots available at Orange Street Garage, and that's according to Traffic and Transportation.
Any questions? Thank you very much. Okay, we heard from the people, and we heard from staff. Any questions? Mr. Quintero, then Mr. Mnuchin.
I don't have any questions, but I'd like to make some comments, and some of them are going to be repeats of what I've said throughout this whole ordeal, if you want to call it that, or at least that's what I characterize it. First of all, the reason I was for this from the beginning was the fact that it continues to keep training opportunities available for the citizens of Glendale. Number one, if you check the last census, you'll see the high percentage of low-income residents that we have in this city. And this geographically lets people, whether they're immigrants or they're high school graduates, recently graduated from high school, people who have lost jobs here in this city, it lets them continue to train and brings them into another level of employment. And it happens to be, this medical field happens to be a level of employment that's sorely needed in this state and, of course, throughout the country. The Hospital Association of Southern California represents 190 medical centers. The quote is, we need to literally double the amount. We need to double the amount of nurses than we currently have in the system. So I'm all for this use. I think this is the perfect use. In many cases, for some of these people, it's going to be this entry-level job. They're out of there in 7 months, 9 months, 11 months, and then hopefully they're going to go on to future upgrades in the medical profession. Business and medical colleges, if you look historically, they've always been in the downtowns. Downtown Los Angeles, wherever there's a downtown, you have business and medical colleges that are there. That's the way it's always been. And then finally, as to this particular location, number one of the attractions for me is that some of these students will be shopping in the little mom-and-pop stores, they'll be eating in the restaurants, etc. But just as important, we're going to be drawing money for an empty parking structure. The Orange Street Garage and the Marketplace Garage, that is that commercial center there with the frogs at the front, both of those parking structures are empty. The surveys show it, our traffic and transportation people, there are numerous surveys, they're just basically empty. Let's face the facts. From time to time, when the Alex has a particularly significant program, at night, late at night I might add, there is some queuing up as people go out of the Orange Street Garage, but for the most part, no one is parking there. So this is a great use. It's only going to be for 3 years, but this will be a great use. And as for the tickets and the enforcement, parking enforcement, let me tell you, every time I go to Porto's, and I go there all the time, I go to the used bookstore, I'm constantly seeing traffic enforcement, so they're certainly visible. So I don't think we're going to have a problem with the students. We'll be able to monitor them electronically to see who's parking in the structure and who's not. I just think this is a great use, and I'm very happy. I'll be ready to make the motion whenever the discussion and comments are over.
Mr. Mnuchin.
Yes, I was initially opposed to this proposal. I just couldn't see the logic. behind putting a college use, a high parking use, in an area where there's no parking, and that was my initial opposition. Regardless, I think very highly of the college. I think they're excellent, and they do need to provide the services. But considering some of the statements being made in terms of office space vacancy in the city, why this space where you can rent somewhere else with parking and not deal with all this hoopla with the variance and exceptions and all of that? That just didn't make sense to me. That's why I opposed it. However, what we said last time, I will abide by. I think that was a good compromise. I know there's a difficult business situation as well. I'm willing to help out a Glendale business, to continue in the services that they provide, and turning to the city attorney, as long as what we stated last time is being followed, I'm fine with it in terms of 3 years. If they're not in a position to move to somewhere else in the city of Glendale, as the San Fernando project in Dorn, then they would forego the bond. And if I'm not mistaken, the condition was, with no exceptions, you have to move in 3 years. And that's it. I'm willing to go. I know, regardless of what happens, the overlap and all of that, we're splitting hairs. There's going to be overlap. There's going to be some impact to the neighbors. Hopefully, it'll be minimal. I know that the college has been dealing with staff in good faith, and I will approach this in good faith, and hopefully you will be able to deal with staff, and I'm sure the staff will all park there, but the students, in terms of not impacting the community, because whether we're businesses or residents, we're all in this community. We're all living together. We have to be able to work together to come up with a resolution. So I'm ready to support it and move on. This has taken a while, but let's get it done.
Mr. Najarian.
I have a couple questions of staff before my comments. The first one was, at some point, I think I had raised the issue of requiring the college folks to park in the upper levels of the garage. I'm not sure if that was incorporated into the agreement. I'm not sure if that's something that council is willing to go to at this point, requiring them to park in the top 2 floors or whatever, leaving the lower floors open for the shorter stop patrons.
Where are the car dealers?
Mr. Yosefian, members of the agency, Mr. Najarian, and John O'Bidanian is also here to address that, but there are a couple of issues there. One, we don't designate parking spaces in that garage. It's operated on a first-come, first-served basis, but we do also have parking for the auto dealers, the stock cars that are on the upper levels. And Mr. Bagdanian can describe a little bit more detail how that works and might interact with the possibility of what you're suggesting.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we've discussed that with the applicant, and our plan is to actually require that the students park at a certain level. In other words, the auto dealers right now, there are not as many cars as of right now. There's about 45 cars that are there, so they will be on the roof. Then we will start from the roof and move down. We require the students to, with instructions, that they park at that level so that we can basically save the first 3 levels for the retail uses, Alex Theater, and other restaurant uses. So that's our plan. And we do that in some of the parking structure, whether monthlies, we require that they park at the lower levels of the parking garage, for example, in the marketplace, or in the exchange garage, and we'll do the same thing in the Orange Street garage.
Thank you. That was my first point. Second point is, let's fast forward 3 years, and the development at San Fernando and Doran is snagged, let's say, due to, let's say, a inspection issue, something that the city has control over. To what extent can that serve as a defense to the surrender of the bond by the college, saying that you, city, have control over this particular condition, which would permit us or not enable us to move into our secondary location, and you're playing games with us and we're not going to pay your $1 million bond because Mr. Inspector didn't inspect that, and we think that it should have been inspected a long time ago.
Right.
Or delay in processing, or a multitude of other sort of issues that are in the city's control technically.
Agency Member Najarian, of course, those are arguments that could be made. However, let me point out that the bond has been drafted such that it is very clear. It isn't a contingency. That's part of it. It's an absolute requirement regardless of what happens externally with respect to any other location they might consider. It's 3 years. It's 3 years for the parking exception, which we can proceed on enforcement on independently, and it's 3 years to vacancy from the date of occupancy, 3 years to vacancy, period.
So no implicit or express guarantee that anything done on that San Fernando and Doran site, whether in the city's control or not, is a condition of the surrender of the bond.
There is no mention of the letter of intent. There is no mention of which is a non-binding document, there are copies of which were just provided to you. It is not a condition of that bond. It is solely for the purpose of ensuring their performance to vacate the premises within that 3-year period.
Because you can get a lot of good attorneys for $1 million.
We should also point out that there are a number of cases that note that delays in the inspection process, delays in the processing of land use entitlements are all inherent within a process. That doesn't mean someone can't file a lawsuit, but generally speaking, you're not going to prevail on a theory of delay unless it's something extremely significant, bordering on intent.
How about a force majeure?
Unless there's a provision in the agreement.
Do we have a provision which would...
We don't.
No. So if there were, let's say, an earthquake or some other natural disaster or something of that magnitude, that in and of itself is not going to extend the 3-year time period within which the bond would be payable.
Good attorneys could always make that argument, but it is not an express provision in the term of the bonds. I would imagine under those catastrophic circumstances, we'd be revisiting a number of agreements, and that would likely be one of them.
Okay. And then my comments, Mr. Chairman. I was against this use and this parking variance, parking exception from the beginning. I do not think that it is an excellent use for the site. However, I can tolerate it for 3 years. And the reason I don't think it's an excellent use is I think we are not going to be fully parked out for those 3 years. The use of, college kids, I think we were all college kids, and we acted a different way. We spent money in different ways. We're just different than the mature, respectable adults that we are now.
I wasn't like that.
So for 3 years, I will give the college the benefit of the doubt. We can welcome them to their new location in 3 years, and if we're still around, maybe we'll be part of the dedication ceremony and give nice speeches and stuff. But I think that is the better spot for them. And in the meantime, I think we can permit them to stay at this brand location with the parking exception and the use of the Orange Street garage.
Mr. Weaver.
Can somebody answer me the question, when did all this start with the college? It wasn't 2005. It was before the Doran Platts. How many years back? 2003, 2004? 2004?
2004.
Okay. I have not changed my position one iota since 2004. I've supported this. I still support it. One of the main reasons is that the Kalku transportation study that we utilized back when indicated very clearly that the Orange Street garage didn't belong where it did. It belonged back of Porto's Bakery. And I voted against the Orange Street garage where it is. And where the garage is, it's half empty. Just what the studies would predict. As far as concerns, there's over I'm reading 271 up to 406 empty spaces in that garage, even after you factor in the college, the car dealer storage, whatever. There's plenty of room. When we do the mobility study, according to the study we're getting today, a 15% reduction downtown in traffic flow, if it holds true. 3 years is going to tell us a lot after the mobility plan is in action, because the idea is to shift people, especially this workers of businesses, from Brand Boulevard into the structure. So it's going to be a whole new ballgame 2-3 years out. 3 years does give the college time to weigh their options. If it's not going to work downtown, they know far enough ahead that they can look for another site. If they're prudent, they would be doing that. As far as the college itself, I don't know how much they help the businesses there. 70% of their students are female. A good many of them are married, have families. When they leave, they're going home to their families. I have been to the college many times, spoken at their graduations. They're a good institution to have in Glendale. Is that the best location? I'm not saying it is. I know that we will likely not see them for the most part. We're going to have 7,500 square feet of retail in front of them. They're downstairs in the basement. They're in the back. So what's the problem? As long as it can be parked and monitored, and I think we do have to have a way of making certain that they are parking there. The problem in that area is 24-hour fitness, and we can't touch it. If the Dornplatz project had gone through, 24-hour fitness would have been parked in the structure underneath. That would have solved the problem totally. That's what I was for. So I think it's worth it, regardless of where you want to say they should be located in this city. I hope we find the place in the city where they can stay for many years to come. So as I said at the beginning, I will continue to back this. I'm happy, I guess the majority of my colleagues feel the same way for 3 years at least.
A question from staff. Is there bike racks in that garage?
I haven't seen them.
I think we have some, but I don't recall exactly how many. We do have a budget for installation of bike racks.
How many do you know?
Motorcycle parking, too.
I know they have a couple there. Yeah.
Okay. I think that's a good point, because some students will use that, not all, but some students will use that. One of the other things that I think some of the concerns that I see in here with basically the letters and the petitions, I think the concern is for students not to park in the parking structure and park outside. I think some of the concerns we can put to rest as we move forward with the study later on. And we'll find out that there are plans to put in parking meters on Brand. And there is going to be some nice prices on those. And the main goal is to move people out of the meters into long-term parking in any of our parking structures. And so this will provide more parking available on the street for the merchants. So the merchants are not hurt by that. So we're very sensitive to merchants, and I think that's part of the reasons we are doing some of the things that we're doing. I originally was against this plan because there was no certainty how long the college was going to stay there. I had some issues. But I think the college and Dornplatz have gone forward to deal with some of the issues. I think the college's willingness to put out $1 million cash bond saying, listen, we mean what we say, and we say what we mean. And if you don't believe me, here's my $1 million. And I think that says a lot. I think we have that. On top of that, we have a covenant that is signed by Dornplatz that says they will be out in 3 years. There's also a memorandum of understanding, an LOI, which is signed by both sides that says they are working on a new location on San Fernando Road to build a permanent location for them. What turned me around was mostly that item, because it is consistent with what this city has done in the past and it's doing currently, which is we help businesses who are in this city for a period of temporary time to park their vehicles in our parking, and then they upgrade their facilities. We've done it for all the auto dealers. They are going to build a new auto dealership. They don't have room to park their cars. We allow them to park in our parking buildings, and we charge them for a nominal amount or sometimes for nothing, but they are willing to put the investment into this community, so it is coming back. And this is what it was the linchpin for me, is the fact that Dornplatz is going to build them a new facility. They're going to stay in this city. And one thing I do agree with Mr. Quintero, and maybe not everything, but that one I agree on. College is an asset to this community, a big asset to this community. And I think any college that teaches people to better their life, it's a good asset to have. And we have had it in this city for many years. We have several other colleges like this, and I like to keep them in this city. I was not interested in letting them use it for 3 years and then just pack up their bags and just leave out of the city. That's why I wanted the LOI. So I think both sides have done what they needed to do so far. One other question that I like to ask staff, which was brought up by a speaker, is the issue of permits. And maybe somebody from Dornplatz can answer that. Is currently Dornplatz, my understanding is, have they pulled permits is the work going forward?
Yes.
Is the work going to be done with permits?
Yes, it was. It has been already. What they've done is under permits.
Okay. So they are following city codes and regulations
Yes.
and all that stuff.
Including inspections.
They
that's correct.
gambled.
Because what good for goose is good for the gander.
They
So I-
gambled, Mr. Siffin, they gambled that they could eventually do this. They're willing to take the risk by going ahead with permits to do what they've done.
We
It was a
actually-
gamble.
Mr. Chair, members of the agency, we actually worked with them in drafting a release and waiver so that they could understood that they developed no vested right as a result of pulling those building permits.
Okay.
And that was incorporated into and as an exhibit to the permits.
So if we turned this down, not that we would, unless 4 of them change their mind, but if we did, they would still have the permits for all the tenant improvements, it's just that they cannot have the tenant move in there.
That's correct.
Okay, so I hope that answers your question, Mr. Allen. So to me, I think everybody has tried to dot all the i's, cross all the t's, and in the end of the day, I think for a 3-year term, having the college in that location will be fine with me, with the exception of one thing that the gentleman, Mr. Halpern, brought this up, and I think we need to deal with, and we have the technology, which is if you have a card, there needs to be a certain amount of finite time on that card, because you're going to have 400 students, and 400 of them are going to have that pass. I do not want 400 of them parking there, because now all of a sudden your exception from 140 becomes 400. So if you have classrooms in the morning, you're going to have maybe an hour before, an hour after. Now, if a certain person, which I do believe, as Mr. Weaver says, most of them happen to be family person, whether they're women or men, they're going to go to their work or they're going to go home. But if there are some that decide they want to stay, if they're going to stay longer, then I think they should be treated like anybody else who's coming to the parking there. They will get their whatever hours is for free because the college has paid. Anything over, they just fork over the cash, and like anybody else who just walks in, park there, and go buy some sandwich. So, and I think staff has the ability to do that, and they will look into it maybe within a month or something and come back to us and let us know how this is working. Maybe you can send a staff report to all of us to know how they're complying with that. One last question, when do you anticipate moving into the project?
ASAP.
60 days? I heard 60 days. Okay, so 60 days. So our term of 3 years will start from the time that we have a occupancy permit issued?
Issuance of the certificate of occupancy by the city, that's correct.
Do we have a motion?
Close public hearing.
Public hearing is closed. And do we have a motion?
6A1.
Second. Okay, there's a motion and a second with council agency comments. And with that, roll call, please.
Agency members Manukian?
Yes.
Najarian?
Yes.
Quintero?
Yes.
Weaver?
Aye.
Chairman Yusefian.
Aye.
I'll
Motion
move
passes.
6A2.
Second.
Roll call.
Agency members Manukian?
Yes.
Najarian?
Yes.
Quintero?
Yes.
Weaver?
Aye.
Chairman Yusefian.
Aye. Motion also carries. And so you have 60 days, get it done, move in, and to dorm plats, I will tell you, we are very serious. We're hoping that you will move forward rapidly, build that building, because we want them in there in 3 years. Thank you, gentlemen, ladies. What's next, please?
Are there any agency member or staff comments?
Peace be with you.
Any? I have one comment. In the past, in the last few days, there has been some talk about the vote we took on an item dealing with the location of where we're going to hold our Glendale investment program, and we chose to have a different location. It has come back to me that our vote is looked upon as a negative vote against the Hilton Hotel. I just want for myself to explain that the vote is not a negative against Hilton Hotel. The vote is to have in a different venue which is more central to the agency's location. So I just wanted to clarify my vote on that. With that, is there any other? Hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
We are adjourned. Do we go
I got it.
mobility? Are we taking,
Your next item will be the study session.
Wait a minute.
should we take like a 5 minutes?
It's up to
No,
the
no, we
mayor.
can go.
Mayor.
Dana, would you check with Rich Wells? We're adjourning yet. Let's go.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Yusefian suggested a brief break.
Why?
I don't know.
I don't.
You're missing two as it is, so. Go on.
Why do we need a break?
It's entirely up to you, Mr. Mayor. If you want to get started, we'll get started.
I want to get started, but now I don't have a quorum.
Then wrap your gavel, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Yusefian's in the room.
Good long.
Let's go with the study session. I'd like a break before we start council tonight.
Have the Sergeant at Arms bring Mr. Yusefian back to his seat. What do you think?
He's close enough.
Why just Mr. Yusefian? What happened to Mr. Quintero?
Okay.
Always get short of his
I'd like to call to order a study session for February 3rd.